After seeing the stray Labrador at the park for 5 days in a row, Daisy decided to feed him. Surprisingly, she noticed that he had a collar with something written on it. This prompted her to adopt the homeless dog. She had been successful in gaining the animal's trust with food and toys, and was stroking it when she suddenly felt a foreign object around its neck. Daisy was amazed when she got a better view of the dog. She was startled when she felt something around its neck as she stroked it. Was it wearing a collar? The fur had covered it up so much that Daisy hadn't realized it before. Was there an owner associated with this pet? She quickly turned the collar around to see if it had any information on it as to where the dog should be returned to. But when she saw what was actually on there, Daisy immediately turned to her husband. She could barely believe what she was seeing. There was no name, address, or even a phone number on the tag, but Daisy's husband still immediately knew what he was looking at and that they had to take action right away, but was written on the dog's tag. And what was a dog with a collar doing? Living in the park? Hey there, viral videos here. Before we go on like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification. We post the most beautifully amazing and scary videos every single day. Let's proceed with the video. After noticing that a stray dog was hanging around the park, Daisy and a few of her neighbors started bringing food for it. The dog appeared to be a male Labrador. He was large and shaggy, and he always seemed grateful for the help. However, there was one thing Daisy just couldn't figure out. The dog had obviously not been a stray for long, but no one seemed to recognize the animal. He stayed in the park and rarely left, especially once people started putting out food and water. Daisy and her neighbors hoped to lure the dog over time to see if he had any information on his, but they kept running into the same problem with their plan. Daisy was worried that the dog had run away from an abusive or neglectful owner. She was used to seeing dogs who were happy and wanted to play. This dog, on the other hand, acted totally different. Daisy studied his habits from day to day and came to a sad conclusion. Daisy realized that the dog didn't trust any of them. He never let anyone get close, and his tail was always hanging down whenever anyone approached. He wouldn't even eat unless everyone had backed far enough away that he felt safe after no one claimed the dog. Within 3 days, the neighbors decided to take action. Daisy called animal services about the dog, but they told her that they didn't have the resources to help find his owner. They were willing to catch him, though. But when Daisy asked for additional information about how they handled stray dogs, she immediately changed her mind. Calling for help had been a mistake. Animal services told Daisy that they would bring the dog to a shelter. Daisy was shocked to hear that the shelter put down dogs that weren't adopted within 5 days. It seemed like such a short period of time. Daisy refused to give animal services the location of the dog, and she would have to find a solution on her own. Even after the other neighbors lost interest, Daisy kept going to the park to feed the dog and check on him. She started to look forward to seeing him every day, and the dog became more and more comfortable with her. Daisy began to wonder if maybe there was another solution besides the shelter. After all, Daisy had never wanted a pet before, but she talked to her husband about adopting the. Her husband agreed that they could take in the dog. It would be a lot of work, but they were both excited. However, before they could bring the dog home, they needed to catch him first. Daisy and her husband John went to the store and bought wet food, some toys, and a bag of treats that they hoped would interest the dog. They found him in the park by the picnic tables and showed the dog what they'd bought. Daisy couldn't believe how the dog reacted. Unlike many other days when Daisy visited, the park was empty since it was still early. The dog seemed happy to see her and was obviously interested in the food they'd brought. But what really surprised Daisy was that the dog was willing to come closer without her calling him. Maybe they'd be able to catch the dog easier than they'd thought. Daisy was so excited to give the dog a better home than he'd ever had before. Seeing the tired Labrador come closer made her believe that the dog was beginning to trust her and that maybe they'd be successful after all. As much as she wanted to bring the dog home, Daisy knew that she needed to stick to the plan. In the past, Daisy had just left food out and backed away to give the dog some. This time she put the food down and then sat by it. Her husband moved off to the side. The dog froze when he noticed that Daisy was staying. She tried not to look as anxious as she felt was he about to run away. The dog was clearly unhappy that Daisy wouldn't move. He paced in a straight line, refusing to take even one step closer. He even barked at her a few times. Daisy called to him quietly and remained as calm as possible. Finally, the dog moved 1 inch forward. Then 2, the dog was too hungry to resist the food and slowly crept. Daisy could see that his muscles were tense. He was ready to leap away at any moment. After the dog was done eating, he didn't rush off. Daisy reached out and ran her fingers over his fur. That's when she felt something unexpected. The dog was wearing a collar. It was almost the same color as his fur, so no one had noticed it. Beneath the animal's thick coat, Daisy could barely contain her disappointment. Maybe her theory had been wrong and the dog had a loving owner out there she needed to find. Before the dog got spooked, Daisy rotated the collar to look for a tag. She found a rectangular one on the other side that almost seemed too large for the collar. She was expecting to see the owner's phone number or the information for a vet, but when she read it, she could barely believe her eyes. The tag was stamped with what appeared to be a username and password. There wasn't a name or a link to any website. At first, Daisy thought it must have been an identifier for some kind of pet tracking service. But then she saw the third line of text and gasped. Daisy held the dog and waved at John to come closer. She showed him the string of numbers on the collar, and they agreed that they had to be coordinates. Daisy thought that maybe they showed the location of the owner's home, but that didn't explain the username and password. John looked up the coordinates online and found an address. The dog was completely settled by then, so Daisy and John decided that the best thing to do was bring the dog along while they checked out the... Maybe they would even find the dog's owner and have a chance to verify that the dog was being treated well. They put the dog in the car and set out in the direction of the house. Daisy and John were both quiet. They wanted the dog, and Daisy was especially invested after taking care of the animal for the past few days. At the same time, she knew it wasn't fair to keep a dog if he belonged to someone else. They were about to find out. It didn't take long to cross town. The dog was obviously used to riding in a car and seemed comfortable in the back seat. As soon as they got closer, however, the dog grew excited and stared out the window. He seemed to recognize where they were going. The closer they got to the address, the more the neighborhood seemed to change. They were getting to the industrial side of town with hardly any trees around. It worsened even further as Daisy could spot more and more abandoned houses. She was starting to get a really bad feeling about this. She and John looked at each. This was by no means a place for a dog to live, they concluded. This also explains, somehow, why the animal was spending so much time by the park. Daisy wanted her husband to just stop the car, turn around and go home. At the same time, a guilt started to grow over her. They had to at least talk to the owners when they went on for 5 more minutes. The address had to be very close. The couple could see it. When looking at the dog's reaction, it started to wag his tail, and after a while he excitedly barked in the direction of the worn-down house, or so it seemed. They were sure that this had to be the place, so John parked the car in front. They did not step out of the car yet, as further plan had to be discussed. The neighborhood and this house in particular seemed potentially unsafe, so John decided that it would be best for him to approach the house on his own. Daisy would stay in the car with the dog as he was way too excited to have a calm conversation with the owners. John got out quickly so that the sounds of the barking wouldn't leave the car too much. He casually walked up to the house and knocked on the door after he couldn't find any doorbell. Daisy eagerly and nervously watched every move from a distance. They waited, but nobody was opening the door. Now Daisy saw how John walked away from the door and turned to the side of the house to be able to get a peek through one of the windows. Then he turned around and shouted something back in the direction of the car, but as no car door was open, Daisy couldn't understand him. She decided to open one of the windows foolishly. This action seemed harmless, but it was exactly what the dog had been waiting for. It immediately reacted, and out of nowhere, the excited animal jumped from the back seat over Daisy's lap, through the window onto the lawn. The Labrador was gone before Daisy could fully process what was going on. The dog stayed there for a second, but soon after it started to charge the house at full speed. John saw him coming as he was looking in the direction of the car, but there was no way he was going to stop The dog went onto the side of the house, passing John on his way, and jumped through a broken window to get inside. Daisy had quickly gotten out of the car, and at this point she started to panic a little bit. She shut the door and walked up on the lawn to meet John, who stood there frozen in shock. What were they supposed to do now? Could they go after the dog, or would that be considered breaking and entering? John wasn't sure either. He decided that he'd better try the door again, and so he started pounding on the door with a lot more force. This time, nothing came, so he started shouting, asking through the door whether anyone was. Still, no response came except for the loud barks that they heard through the cracks of the house. While John was in front, his wife was trying to find any clues for people at the back of the house. She wanted more than anything now to solve this mystery and was hoping to find any owner of this house in the backyard. Although Daisy did not find a single living being as she hoped for, she did find something else here. There was a back door, and it appeared to be. Normally, Daisy would not check whether she could enter a stranger's home from the back, but this door was barely hanging in the frame. Daisy felt like she was at a crossroads here. Was she really going to enter an unknown house in a potentially dangerous neighborhood? At the same time, Daisy realized that seeing the Labrador again was for her the most important thing in the world. She was willing to take the risk, and at this point, she was pretty sure that no human would be in this house this time. But first, it would be wise to call John over to the back. John, to her surprise, seemed a lot more hesitant than she was, and yet he knew that Daisy's mind was already made up and therefore he accepted. All he could do now was to go with her, as well as to make sure that his wife would be safe inside this abandoned-looking stranger's house with heavy crackling. The door opened, although Daisy was not sure if this door would ever close. They got inside carefully, and it quickly became quite obvious that no person had actively been living here in the last years. The walls were covered in gravity, and most items seemed old or destroyed. The whole place had an unpleasant atmosphere, and Daisy started to question more and more why this dog was so attached to the house. What was the reason for the animal to be in such an abandoned place, and why does the Labrador have these coordinates hanging around his neck? It had to be that somebody was or had been here. The whole bottom floor was empty and no clues could be found regarding any living person or dog. John did find the stairs to the upper floor, however. The only possibility left was the Labrador having run up the tiny stairs. At the moment that the two were looking up towards the ceiling, they could hear a familiar barking again. They went up with speed, and in the bedroom at the top of the stairs, Daisy saw the friendly Labrador lying on the. It appeared that the dog was not alone. Next to it, under the blankets, was an old and weak-looking man, petting the animal. The man did not look up at first when the couple entered the room, and he looked in bad shape. After a while, he did notice Daisy and John in the corner of the room. He looked spooked while the two did not know what to do. The Labrador, on the other hand, only acted very excited to see them again. This helped the old man to calm down again, and after a little while the three started talking. It started off slowly as the old man could only speak with a soft voice and long breaks between the words. Daisy and John found out that the man had been living in this old house for years now. The previous owners had just left it behind, and nobody had any interest in buying or selling the house because of the bad condition it was in. The dog was actually named Jacko, and it was a Labrador that belonged to the previous owners. Apparently, they had left Jacko behind with the house. The man had before been homeless for decades, but when he took shelter one night in this abandoned place, he and the dog met and they bonded soon enough. The old man was not the one responsible for the coordinates around Jacko's. The color was already put there by the previous owners, and he just let it stay there. As long as he was here, he wanted the dog brought back to him. If anyone found Jacko, at least that was up until 1 week ago. Since the last week, the old homeless man had felt his health going downhill fast. He had the feeling that his end was near, and it had felt better to pass away without Jacko by his side. For this reason, he'd asked an old friend of him to take Jacko and drop him off at the park at which he could happily find a new life to live. The old man was hoping for someone to take a liking in the Labrador. He told Daisy and John that it would be his last wish for them to adopt the dog and take care of Jacko as good as possible. He appreciated that they brought the animal here so that he could say goodbye one more time. But after that, it was time for them to separate. The couple, surprised to hear all of this, offered the man a ride to a hospital. He refused, explaining that he was done with life and now just wanted to leave this world in. It was very difficult for the two to leave him behind as they did, but seeing his glittering eyes when Daisy told him they'd gladly adopt the dog as his final wish spoke volumes. They looked at Jacko and knew this was the right decision. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, like the video and subscribe. See you next time.